talk about Auburn. Because Auburn, I think there's probably mixed opinions on Auburn across the board. And I'm like, if you put Auburn in the Big Ten West tomorrow, and I know the Big Ten West doesn't exist, but like they're probably in Indy competing with Michigan for the Big Ten title. Now you put them in the SEC, and there's all this thought around how they stack up with Bama and Georgia, even though they took both those teams to really the last drive with Georgia, the last play with Alabama. But then you have this weird data point that's the outlier that was the New Mexico State game. What do you make of Auburn right now?
Well, I think to put it all together, to give it a total grade, we got to get through, signing day, which is now, in December, because that's obviously so important to what Hugh Freeze is trying to do moving forward. And then obviously through the transfer portal, I would say this year I would give them a B. I thought against the teams outside of New Mexico State that they were better than, they beat. And against the teams that were better than them, they hung in there, and really, let's be honest, JD, I mean, they blew the Bama game. There's not a nice way to put it when you give up 4th and goal from the 31 after you caught every single break that you had to catch down the stretch. So listen, first, you inherit at a place like Auburn, obviously the standard is really high. The brand is really big, and you're expected to win. But I thought Hugh Freeze and his staff did a good job of instilling culture, and being able to kind of bring some new excitement and hope to Auburn. You look at this recruiting class right now, and I know, with signing day going on and all this, people are going to judge it depending on who goes where, but it's looking pretty sporty for Auburn right now. And if you're able to put a good class together with a couple key transfer portal pieces, I mean, you got Fairweather coming back. You've had some big-time guys. You got offensive linemen coming back, good offensive linemen, which Auburn has not had returning in a while. Again, I got a broken down car in the garage, and I mean, I've had it for a while. It's got experience, but it's not going out there playing well right now. So I'm not going to use it, and it's not helping me. But I would give them a B, and that could increase depending, how Auburn's signing class ends up.
My thing, Jake, was they played the majority of the season without a pass game. Like Peyton Thorne, as good as he was on the ground, like he didn't get that spring practice. And this, having been around the game for as long as you were as a coach, like that's a super important part of your season where you're kind of all starting to take those first steps together and eventually you get up to speed. He didn't get that. And so I wonder if giving him a full off season, if maybe he's not, Peyton Manning this time next year, but maybe he's a little bit more comfortable. Maybe he's kind of figured out the way the car works a little bit better. And if you can be a little bit more dynamic, if you're Auburn, I mean, they're going from being in those games to outright winning those games. And I mean, the Georgia game comes to mind with how they finished last year. So I'm not saying that Auburn's going to just outright take down Georgia and throttle them next season, but I do think with where Auburn sits right now, giving them a full offseason to kind of gel under Hugh Freeze, it's headed the right direction. Are people able to adequately assess Auburn? Because like you said, we view it through the SEC lens and who they have to play. Do people have the right gauge for where Auburn is right now nationally?
Well, I think it depends on kind of what side of the fence you fall on. I mean, if you're truly down the center and you're judging it, based on performance, I think it was a little bit above average situation. Now you look at the way they competed against Georgia and Alabama. I think a lot of people would say they're on the right track. But at the end of the day, you've got to take that step. And, it used to be you had 3 years, right? You had 3 cycles to get through to be able to show progress and maybe get that extension or have the 80 have confidence in you to give you a couple more years. Now with the transfer portal and the arms race of college football, it's really 2 years. So Hugh Freeze has to show progress. And look, I always say at a place like Auburn, the standard should never be the standard getting lowered should never be accepted, but reality should always be accepted. Auburn didn't have a great roster this year. This is not a game where you go out and just trick somebody for the whole season, let alone 4 quarters. You have to at some point be able to line up and just be better than somebody. In some cases, against Vanderbilt and against UMass and some of these other Stanford, Auburn was just better than these teams. But they punched above their weight when they had to punch above their weight. But when you talk about not only Peyton Thorne returning, because let's be honest, JD, Peyton Thorne doesn't have to be Neo, right? Hell, he doesn't have to be Morpheus. He could be Trinity. Just drive the motorcycle good and hit who you shoot at. That's it. Peyton Thorne does not need to be relied on to be the reason, but he can be the difference when you put good enough personnel around him. So it's hard for me. And look, there were some down points with Peyton Thorne where he looked like he struggled to throw the ball. JD, you played, you watched him. Sometimes you watch him, you're like, who is this guy? And then it seems in some of these other games, including Georgia, he's able to fit those in there. But his running element in this offense, I think, is underrated. Because when you look at Peyton Thorne, you really don't think Lamar Jackson, and then all of a sudden you turn around and he's by you. Like, he's sneaky fast, a little bit like Dylan Gabriel, just sneaky fast. So I think he's good enough with the right tools around him. But if there's a better quarterback that you can go get, I think you got to go get him. But there's a thread there, JD. You don't just go get a guy to get a guy. If you're going to go get a guy, you're trying to get the guy and then turn it into a competition. So I think he can do it. But just like in the game, every other position in the sport of football, in the game of football, you need help from your teammates. That's why it's the greatest sport that God ever put on this earth.
No, I could not agree more, especially what you said about Peyton Thorne. Like, to give him another season in that offense, and what he did running the football last year, like, we heard coaches every single week from a press conference level say, yeah, Robbie Ashford's their guy they use, in certain run packages, but the other guy, Peyton Thorne, like, he can move really well too. He's not just like a sneaky fast guy. Like, he's legitimately got good athleticism that can hurt you on those run plays.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, he's
unbelievable,
running.
Man, how that was always the narrative.
It wasn't just against, Stanford. It was against Georgia and Bama. So, at some point, these aren't exactly the slowest guys running around in the playground. Like, these are NFL players that he's able to run past it in some points. So, again, you have some tools there, but you're not Home Depot, that's for sure.
Jake, last thought on Auburn. What would be a win total that is like, okay, yes, I am happy with success to this point in the Hugh Freeze era? I know it's the Hunger Games next year with the ridiculous SEC scheduling, how difficult that'll be, but what number would make you happy if you're an Auburn fan?
I think 8, right? I think 8, a solid 8 for a year. It's going to be tough. You got Bama and Georgia on the road. Like, that's never fun and it's never easy, but at least they're not back-to-back. And if you look who those two teams play before they play Auburn, it's not exactly a walk in the tulips. But I think the right 8-4 would be very happily accepted with continued momentum in recruiting and towards the future. You get to 9-3, now you start talking about, can you get in the playoff, right? Because if you can be 9-3, I think you could be 10-2. If you're 10-2 in the SEC, you are getting into the college football playoff. At least, heck, you can be 12-1 and get in over an undefeated ACC team. So I'm sure a 10-2 team that maybe just lost to Alabama and Georgia, kind of like Ole Miss did this year, you've got to be in, right?
Feels that way, man. I think LSU was 13 this year, so if we're setting the playoff up by nature of those rankings, I think that would probably shift a little bit if we were to do the auto bids and all that, but we're just taking it at face value. 9-3 puts you right on the doorstep of getting into that 12-team playoff. And for Auburn, for the schedule they play, their 9-3 is a very different 9-3 than if you're coming from a conference that's not in the SEC. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.